Welcome to the Daily Dawg podcast. Today is Friday, September 26th, and we are just one day away from the big clash against rival Alabama. This is week 5 of the 2025 season. This is, again, your Friday podcast here on the Daily Dawg. So today it's time to start breaking down this game in a little more detail. Before I do that, though, I got to jump in again. I've told you that whenever I make mistakes, and I unfortunately do make mistakes, I will correct them because they bother me forever. And so a bunch of you probably don't care. Some of you might have noticed, some of you might not. Yesterday, in our sort of long dive into the history of college football, where we broke down the eras of college football because we decided we're kind of in a new era, and that era has changed really quickly on us as Georgia fans. We were winning back-to-back titles in 21 and 22, and it's just now the 2025 season, just 3 seasons away. But so much has changed that as we're watching our team and evaluating this season, thinking about how this season is going to go, looking ahead and trying to decide, do we have a championship contending team or not? One of the things that we're seeing is it's a very different team. So whole point of all that discussion and history is to look back and say, look, we have to compare our team to the era we're in now. And it's not just the teams. I guess the bigger point from that, going back to yesterday to sort of sum that up, was the bigger point is not just we're comparing our team to the other teams that are out there today, but we should have a perspective based on the era we're in. And it has changed that fast. And that's maybe what's sort of hard to grapple with, is that the era of football has changed since we won back-to-back titles just 4 or 5 years ago. Or 4 or 5 seasons ago. And that's how fast, and everybody references it. Everybody says the NIL portal era, but I've kind of broken it down. And I guess what I came up with in the podcast yesterday was that we sort of have what I call the bowl and pole era, which was much of the history of college football, but we were looking specifically at the history of the last 45 years, starting with the 1980s and moving forward. So the bowl and pole era kind of covered the 80s and the 90s, and then we moved into this effort to get a more specific way of getting a champion instead of sort of the crazy vote and have people running off to different bowl games all over the place, and rarely was number 1 or number 2 playing each other at the end of the season. So they came up with the simple idea of staging a 1 versus 2 matchup. And then how do you do that? Well, we use the polls, or maybe not just the polls. That's where the whole BCS computer came in, and they came up with this formula to get a percentage of human polls and computer polls. And then we had the BCS, and nobody liked that, even though it did start to bring us a true 1 versus 2 matchup at the end of the season, at least a chance to see the game played on the field. Then we eventually moved into the playoff era, and the playoff era started with the 4-team playoff. And I guess I'll tell you, as much as I'm I'm kind of a traditionalist. I'm obviously, mentioned this many a time, a baseball fan. And I guess anybody who's a baseball fan is a stats and traditionalist and history kind of sports fan, because you sort of have to be that to be a baseball fan, right? And so I'm a little bit of a traditionalist, but I think with college football, I've learned to move along the way, and I'm not completely a get off my lawn kind of guy about everything has to be the way it was and the golden oldies sort of thing. I think the game has evolved a lot, and there's a lot of good things that have come from it. But I am not a big fan, and you might have picked up on this already, of the 12-game playoff era. And I'm not a big fan of the idea of the expansion to the 16, although I'm not sure it makes a huge difference now that we're at 12 if we go to 16. I probably could have lived with an 8-game play or an 8-team playoff. I think the 4 was probably about right. As much as I love the history of the game and the way things had been for a long time, the BCS was not awesome. And there is something to be said for having the games played on the field. And 4 teams is about right. In fact, as I mentioned in the sort of dive through history yesterday, often I think when you look at it, in the 10-year history of the 4-team playoff, it's not even clear the 4th team was actually a worthy college football championship level team. Or you get into this debate, just like what happened to us. Although it wasn't that much of a debate, like we talked about, because we got left out of the playoff in 2023 after losing the SEC championship game to Alabama. We talked about most people kind of accepted that, even us. Although when you look at it, Georgia was one of the 4 best teams. And if that was a requirement, then we probably should have been there. So again, there may be a debate, like when you look at the 4th, 5th, 6th team, which one was truly, and you get to this argument, I guess it's been out there for a while, the difference between deserving and best, right? This was the best team, and that's the argument that happened in Georgia. We were maybe the best team in terms of a team that should have been in a 4 slot at a minimum. Maybe not the best team in the country. Maybe we were. But either way, we were the best team probably that should have been in a slot when it comes down to the last slot, if that's where it was. But maybe we weren't the most deserving team because the system that people had adopted was that, well, you played a championship game. The other team ended up with the same record as you and won their conference championship. So they get into that slot and you don't. And, that's a reasonable point of view, but it's still, and again, that's going back to reminding us that's Alabama. So all through this week, we've been talking about what has Alabama cost us? What has this history of this series lately meant, in terms of glory and failure? And the failure has been that we've lost 9 out of 10. The failure has been that we've directly lost at least 1, maybe more, 2 or more national championships to Alabama in this last 10 years. So these games have usually been impactful, but last year and this year, we get a chance to play a home and away series. Last year's game didn't turn out to be very impactful. Alabama won. We lost. They didn't make the playoff. We did. We won the SEC championship. They didn't. So the game didn't seem very determinative of anything. And to be honest, it's probably in a similar position, except for Alabama's in a more precarious position this year because they already have the 1 loss. So last year, both teams were undefeated. This year, Alabama comes in with a loss, not in conference, won't necessarily prevent them from being an SEC champion, but 2 losses at, just a little over a quarter of the way through the season, certainly going to make it difficult for Alabama to get into that playoff position. We talked a little bit about the history of the bowl and pole era being that you knew what you had to do. You had to try to go undefeated or at least have no more than 1 loss and try to win your conference. That would put you in the best bowl game and give you a chance to be elected national championship in the poll. That's the bowl and pole era. And there was something to that. The playoff era, it became a little more murky, but you still basically had the same essential requirements. And I think that's why I like the 4-team playoff. With 4 teams, you still had to basically shoot for undefeated or 1 loss and win your conference. That was the way to have the most control over expecting to be there. I mean, again, you don't have any control. Control is a fallacy or a myth in this situation, right? And that's what caused a lot of people to be just wildly crazy about some of the outcomes. Florida State people in the 2023 season and and a lot of the national media following the Florida State situation, continue to this day to express, oh, Florida State got hosed. They did everything right. They won their conference and they got left out of the playoff. Well, they also had all kinds of injuries, including they were down not even just to a 2nd string, but a 3rd string quarterback or beyond. And they weren't really able to be competitive. They didn't look competitive against lesser competitive teams. So again, when you get back to that argument between deserving and best, I guess everybody on that situation was falling on, oh, they deserved it. Well, that would be a reward for the season that they had when they had a star quarterback. But when they no longer had a star quarterback, they were just a team with a good defense that was unlikely to beat any contenders. So I think, again, the sense of the same thing happened to them that happened to us. They didn't lose their game, but they lost their star player, and they were a thinly built team. And I think the poll people and the football committee saw that, and I think they made the right decision. Leaving Florida State out of that playoff, just to speak on that for a moment. But my point being is that's an example of, you really don't have control, right? I mean, at least you start the season as a football coach, as a team, and as fans, as us watching. You start the season in the 4-team playoff era. You started the season still much like the bowl and pole era, knowing that what you had to do was try to win all your games, at least try to win your conference, and end up 11-1, maybe 10-2, if that's what it took to win your conference. And your conference is a really good conference that year, especially if you're SEC or Big Ten. You could maybe win your conference at 10-2 and still make that playoff. You might have that argument. You might, especially depending on what your losses were, right? So that's the measure of control you have. And, as far as a fan and as far as teams and coaches, I guess you still have a measure of control now, too, because now that bar has been lowered. Now you can maybe go 9-3 or 10-2, and you're going to make the playoff. 10-2 out of a major conference, if you're in the Big Ten or the SEC, you're almost assuredly you're at least going to be in that consideration. Everybody's going to be talking about you. Let's say that for sure. And they're going to be debating your resume if you're 10-2 and you came out of the Big Ten or the SEC. Not quite as clear if you're in the Big 12 or the ACC. So maybe there you want to control your own destiny. You need to focus on 11-1 and winning that conference because they're not going to get as many bids. But so you still know the requirements. But the difference now is we've sort of what I'm calling charitied these teams in. Once you go to 12 teams, you got a bunch of teams in there that really aren't serious national title contenders. They get into the playoff, but there's very little chance that they're going to advance through 3 or 4 games against other superior teams, which they will run into somewhere in that process. And they're probably not going to advance and win the title. So, but we've opened it up. We have access. That's what we've done now. So we've looked at all that this week and kind of use this week as a time to sort of evaluate that and say, okay, we had the bowl and poll era, the BCS era, the 4-team playoff era. Now we're in the many-team playoff era. Let's just call it 12 for now, probably going to 16, whether we like it or not. And so that puts us in a position of evaluating where we are and where other teams are. And so now it's a different perspective. Now what we need to look at is not, are we the most dominant team in college football because we have to win our conference, we have to go undefeated or at least have one loss and still be in the top 3-4 in the country. That's not the goal anymore, right? The goal is to get into the playoff. And you say, yeah, but I want to be a dominant team. I want to believe we're going to win. I don't want to be one of those teams that's gifted into the playoff and doesn't really have a chance to win. Well, when you have the kind of talent and coaching and history and pedigree that we have, that's okay. You know, you probably by being there have a legitimate chance. And what we talked about yesterday is, look, Ohio State was essentially that team last year, right? They would have been left out of the 4-team playoff. They would have been left out of any consideration in championship season in the bowl and poll era, but they got into the playoff despite having a very depressed feeling about the way their season went and feeling like they failed to make the expectations that they started the season with. And yet they came into the playoff, a team renewed, a new chance. They just whacked everybody through the playoff and they walk away national champion. And today they're sitting at number 1 in the polls and everybody's like, look at them, despite losing 14 players, they're just reloaded and they're right back at the top of the college football heap. And is 4 games eliminated what was actually amazingly depressed feelings about this team. Like I mentioned in the podcast yesterday, Kirk Herbstreit suggested they would have been better off not even playing that playoff game at home. That's how upset the fan base was. They're more likely to boo them than cheer them. That's the mood heading into the playoff. So our evaluation of our team, and this is a big chance to evaluate our team, has to change. And we have to move with this new era. And this new era, because talent is, and everybody's been saying it, look, you're not going to be able to amass as much talent with the portal and transfers, la-di-da. But all of this is just using the Alabama game, the Tennessee game 2 weeks ago, and as we're talking and having this conversation through the season, to understand what kind of team Georgia is and what should we expect, what's reasonable, and what are we looking for as fans. I mean, we're always expecting we want to win every game. We always expect to go undefeated and win the national title. But every year, then we have these conversations between ourselves. Well, what do you really think? I mean, hey, when I'm talking to my Tennessee fans or my Auburn fans, I'm going to tell them we're going to kick their butt and win the national title. But between you and me, what's really going to happen? Well, between you and me, we're seeing, look, it's a young team. A lot of the stars that we think are maybe going to be those guys that traditionally come out of Georgia and end up drafted and making big names for themselves, a lot of those guys haven't really emerged yet. We see Dalen Everett as a guy who's already got draft buzz. Christian Miller has some draft buzz off the defensive line, and that's probably more on potential than it is actual proven stats at the moment. Although, again, being a defensive lineman in the nose guard up front, they don't record a ton of stats. So it's mostly about what guys see on tape. And there's some buzz about him, but not like some of the guys we've had in years gone by on defensive line. So he's going to have to build that. But that's the thing. He's in the position now to build it. And then we got other guys like CJ Allen and hold on a sec. I was trying to get, So we got some other guys that we're looking to become stars, names that we're going to hear every day. And, maybe are going to be those guys who emerge to be top defensive guys. Chris Cole, C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson. These are guys on the defense that we're looking to start to hear buzz about. And if their names emerge throughout the season, then we're going to see these younger guys. C.J. Allen's not necessarily that young, and he's shown himself to be a great player, and he really holds down that linebacker position nicely. Chris Cole's already got a couple sacks this year and looks like the guy who could emerge as one of our best serious pass rush threats. And Raylan Wilson's been playing solid football. In fact, a lot of people, while we haven't seen a ton of stats, a lot of people coming into this season thought our linebacking core would be, traditionally like it is at Georgia, just a huge bonus for this team. So that's where we're coming into. We're coming into this Alabama game, and we're going to break it down now and say, well, what are these guys going to do? Or what do we expect to see happen? We went through this whole era idea, and we're just trying to get that perspective and say, okay, yeah, this team doesn't look dominant, but we know that. And everybody's saying there's no dominant teams out there. And so there's not. So there's a collection of teams that could make the playoff. And none of them are not going to be flawed. So we know we're going to have flaws. We know they're going to have flaws. So it comes down to matchups and how do we match up. So today, now we start digging deeper into the matchups for this Alabama game because that's where it's going to be played. Now, coming into, I want to go back. I started talking about I made a huge mistake. So I was referencing from the bowl and poll era, the BYU team. And I guess I should also offer a little perspective. I went back and remember, I sort of think of BYU as a team that kind of came out of nowhere in 1984 to win the national championship. And I say nowhere because I made the point yesterday. They came out of the WAC, okay? That's the only time the WAC has recorded a national championship, and it's one of the very few times one of the non-traditional conferences. I mean, you've seen teams from the when you go back to the bowl and poll era and the great conferences of old, so to speak, where everybody had a few teams that were competitors. The Big Eight had Nebraska, Colorado, teams like that, and they were contenders, for the national championship, and they won national championships in the last 40 in this time frame we've been talking about since 1984, the last 45 years. We've seen the Pac-12. It was the Pac-10 back then, and then eventually the Pac-12. But they had championship-level teams. Washington Huskies won a national championship. USC won a couple of national championships in these last 45 years we've talked about. So those are elite teams that, provide the opportunity to have, national championship teams. Obviously, the Big Ten has Ohio State, Penn State. They did not originally have Penn State, but they have Penn State now. They have Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan. These are national championship teams. The ACC is not a wash in national championship teams, but they now have Miami, who's never won the conference or a championship since joining the ACC, which was one of the big coups the ACC thought they had when they got Miami. It was like, wow, now we got another national championship contending team. But they kind of seem to have one team that always sticks at the top. So Florida State sometimes has been that team. Clemson has sometimes been that team. And they've been waiting for Miami to be that third team. But Miami historically, of course, is a national championship team. And in this 45-year period we're talking about, Miami's won 5 national titles. So, not to be dismissed. So, these are the conferences and things. So the WAC is never part of that. The WAC, but BYU did have an amazing run in the 80s. So I guess the two things I was going to correct is to say, look, BYU, I kind of said they came out of nowhere and they had a great season and they won the national championship in 1984. That's both true and maybe a little undervalued in terms of what they did, which is to say they had a couple years in the polls and they'd got some attention. And here's where I made another mistake. I said that Jim McMahon had brought a lot of attention to the team, and then he was the quarterback. He was not the quarterback of BYU in 1984. So I misremembered this. He was a quarterback earlier, more like 79, 80, 81. And it dawned on me after I finished the podcast that, wait a minute, if Jim McMahon was winning a Super Bowl with Refrigerator Perry and those great Chicago teams in the mid-'80s, there's no way he was also winning a national championship at BYU, also basically in the mid-'80s or 1984. So I went back and looked it up. Yeah, he was earlier. And then after him was Steve Young, another NFL Hall of Fame Super Bowl winning quarterback. So, and then the guy who was actually at the controls when BYU won the national championship in 1984 was a guy by the name of Robbie Bosco, who actually came in third in the Heisman Trophy balloting that year. He led the nation in touchdowns and yardage. He threw for 3,875 yards, which was like, it's still a lot of yards in today's game, but in that game, in the era of college football back then, that was like, you might as well have been throwing it to the moon and back. Just nobody was doing that. So, So Robbie Bosco was third in the Heisman voting, led the nation with 3,875 yards and 33 touchdowns, and also led BYU to the national championship. And what I was correct about is BYU kind of won that championship because it was a little bit of a default. The idea, and this is what we talked about with the bowl and pull era, right, was get undefeated and get noticed. So what I was trying to get at wasn't completely erroneous in the sense that Jim McMahon did get a lot of attention. He was the sort of the brash quarterback that got people paying attention to BYU. Steve Young comes along and keeps them as a top 25 team, but not a team that quite made it to that title level. And then they go undefeated in that 84 season, and it just works out that every other team kind of eliminates themselves from the other big conferences. So you get to the end of the season, you have BYU. They did go to the Holiday Bowl, and they played an unranked team, I think, in the Holiday Bowl. It might have been Michigan or somebody. It was a significant team, but it was a team from a major conference, but it was a team that went 6-5 and got relegated to a lesser bowl because they were not a championship team. So that's, again, the craziness of the bowl and pull era, right? Is the number one team in the country who's sort of ascended to that by default, but had been on the radar. So I guess the point is, look, they've been on the radar. Jim McMahon helped get them on the radar. And then since they were on the radar and had some notoriety, and they had, they were on their third prolific quarterback after two guys that ended up being Super Bowl champion quarterbacks in the NFL, they got to their third guy, Robbie Bosco, and he's even third in the Heisman voting, leads them to an undefeated season. Everybody else in college football kind of bails out of consideration by losing games they shouldn't have and just not impressing anybody. BYU is the last team standing. So even though they played in the Holiday Bowl, not on January 1st, against a team that barely had a winning record and wasn't even ranked, ultimately, when the bowls were over, they got voted number one. Yay, number one. So the premise was still basically the same, and it highlights the difference in the eras that we were trying to talk about. And part of what I was saying is, and another key point, I think, in evaluating and understanding where we are and looking at our team this year and looking at the situation around us, is not to just keep saying, yeah, the NIL and the portal era spread talent around. Well, I think in many ways, we're back to that 80s and 90s time frame when, teams are more thinly built. And so a key injury or a loss of a guy could take your team down and out of consideration, which we saw that happen to us. I made the point, like in the era where we were a top 10 team, but we had like AJ Green get suspended or Todd Gurley get suspended, and suddenly we can't compete for the SEC or the national championship anymore because 4 games without those guys was too much to overcome, because that's how thinly built those teams were back then, even though we were a top 10 team in that time frame. And so I think we're seeing that again now. It'll be interesting to see what happens to Oklahoma, that they've got to play 3 or 4 games maybe. That fortunately they had an off week this week, but John Mateer, who is leading the Heisman thinking this early part of the season because of what he'd done so far and just resurrecting the Oklahoma offense. But we talked about this earlier in the week too. Just as a reminder, Oklahoma offense was like the worst in the SEC last year, and then they were one of the best this year just by switch of quarterback. And now with Mateer injured, it's not clear that they'll be any good for the next 3 or 4 games. So this is where we are. We're back to this era where one guy, a personality, a great player, can transform the rest. I mean, you got to have ultimately pretty good pieces around you, but one guy can transform a team either up or down depending on what happens to him in this era where the talent is more spread around. Now, in the end, how we pick the championship, nowhere near the same. Now we have this playoff, and ultimately, the more talented teams, is the other point I was making, are going to work their way through the playoff. We can let all these teams in we want that bring in some transfers and exciting and rise up sort of out of nowhere, like Indiana last year, that boom, they go 11-1 and they're in the playoff. But then when you see them play the traditional power teams, the richer blue blood haves teams versus the have-nots, they still have an overwhelming amount of talent compared to those other teams. But games are going to be thinner now, or thinner, more thinly decided, I guess. And I think we saw that Georgia, Tennessee. And this is an example of, we don't just have the same overwhelming talent gap between us and Tennessee now. So we went on the road and it was a dogfight back and forth. But good news is, if you're a dog in a dogfight, hopefully you come out ahead. And we did. So this week, we're probably in the same situation. We have another talented team coming in. On paper, you see that we're number 5 and they're number 17, and you see that we're at home. But then you look at the line and the line, and from Vegas has consistently been somewhere between 2.5 and 4 points. It keeps bouncing up and down. Yesterday it was back to 3.5. At one point it was up to 4. By this morning, when I check again, it's bound to 2.5 again. So who knows where it'll settle by the time game time comes. But the idea is that, look, the Vegas experts, and we've made the point before that they're pretty dang accurate. I mean, they didn't get the over-under right on the Georgia-Tennessee game, but they had that game as a 3.5 point game, and it was a 3-point game, right? So they were right on it. So they have this as a 2.5 point game right now, and it's been between 2.5 and 3.5 points. So we're looking potentially, the lion's share of the thinking points to yet another close game. And so close games, when you play more close games, then a little edge here, a little edge there is going to make more of a difference. We've seen Georgia football sort of overcome. I think one of the phenomenons I thought was really amazing is we weren't always we won some games in dominant fashion in the 21 and 22 seasons where we lost the turnover battle 3-1. And most of the time when you look at the analysts talking about big matchups, they're always like, well, whoever wins the turnover battle. I mean, and you get a lot of stuff that's going to be pretty straightforward. If you outgain the other team, then you're probably going to win. If you win the turnover battle, you're probably going to win. Georgia was so powerful in 21 and 22 that we could lose the turnover battle, even sometimes be -3 in a game and still win the game by 21 points. So we're not going to do that. That's not going to be this team this year. We may see these guys because it is a young team. I was just listening to the radio as I was prepping my notes a little bit this morning. David Pollack was on 680 The Fan this morning, and he made the point, and I'm just reminded of that. I mean, we've talked about it before, but this is a young team. We have seen so many guys transfer and so many guys graduate out, and that's part of what this portal era means, that we're now out there still, like I keep saying, I've said this a bunch of times, you're probably tired of hearing me say it, talent index wise, like if you just find whatever system you want to rate the potential talent of the guys on the roster, Georgia's still at least, if not the most talented team in the country, one of the top 5. And often there's a pretty good gap. Once you get past the 5, you start to see a gap. There really is a group up at the top, 1 through 5, and then there's kind of the rest of the top 15, and then there's another gap, and it kind of goes in groups like that. So Georgia's in that group, so that's good. So you get to the playoff, you get to games like this, and you say, great, we should have a talent edge. Well, the problem this week is Alabama is one of those other 5 teams. They may not have looked like the Alabama we're used to, but they absolutely are still one of those 5 best teams in terms of talent index, sitting right there. So even though we're at home, and even though we're the 5th ranked team and they're 17th, that has a lot to do with performance over the last 12 months plus, right? Last season and this season. But the talent gap is almost non-existent. They have very similar talent to us. So we're going to have to win it on the field. And the general ideas point to a relatively close game. That's not super exciting for us, but let's just take a dive in a little bit and see. Well, let me go back and say this. So leading into the Tennessee game, we went through the outcomes and the scenarios and the way I like to look at games. So when my friends and fans come to me and they talk to me and say, well, who's going to win? How are you predicting the game? I am not prone as a stats and numbers guy. I'm not prone to just going on gut. I ultimately will have a gut. And my final prediction, which I'll probably give tomorrow for tomorrow morning's podcast, will have a certain measure of gut. And I've told you this before, and I'll say it again. The gut thing usually means that most of the time, if it's close or anywhere near, I end up going with Georgia, because what do I want to happen? What's my gut? My gut says, well, I want Georgia to win. I can almost never, as much as I want to be I'm not trying to be a neutral analyst here at all. I'm clearly Georgia focused, but I am trying to be not impartial, but I'm trying to be, I guess what's the word I'm looking for? I'm trying to be realistic. I'm trying to match just the way anybody would analyze this if you looked at the data and you look at the teams and you're impartial. I guess that's it. I'm not impartial, but I'm trying to be an impartial judge of the information I see. And if I see that Georgia has a distinct disadvantage, then I'm going to call that out. But clearly, most of the time, I'm cheerleading quite a bit for Georgia. So in the end, when it comes down to picking a close game, my gut probably wants me to, go Georgia, and that's probably where I'll go. But we'll see as I get to the final prediction. But what I do like to look at, and I think what you can do is you can help sort your feelings, and you can help sort, a random amount of data, and we'll use the data, but you need to apply the data in the right slot. So you'll hear people say, well, Georgia, I think Georgia could be in trouble this week. I'm liking Bama. Their offense has been great, and Georgia's defense, got torched by Tennessee, and they're not getting any pressure. They only have 4 sacks on the season. And if they don't get pressure, imagine Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard running all over the field and torching them. And remember what happened last year against Georgia? Yeah, I think that happens again. And I've heard people make that kind of comment. And that's reasonable, but it's also picking and choosing some stats to just back the argument. It's not going through each thing and putting it together and then sort of adding up the equation. I do like sometimes, used to see some of these analysis sometimes where people break down a game and they go by each position: quarterbacks, linebackers, defensive backs, offensive line, defensive line. And then you kind of check, and then, who has the most checks. That's probably pretty reasonable too, except, whether our offensive line is better than their offensive line doesn't directly win the game. It's how you scheme and play around that and a few other things. So what do we have? What we have is I like to break it down this way. Basically, you have the 3 phases of the game. You got offense, defense, and special teams. So we're going to have the Georgia offense versus the Bama defense. We're going to have the Bama offense versus the Georgia defense. And then we're going to have special teams. And I include in special teams coaching and intangibles. So just kind of everything wrapped up in that third thing, coaching, and that kind of works too, because a lot of times the special teams is where you see coaching moves, right? It always comes down to a big coaching choice when it gets to be a 4th and 1 and at the other team's 13-yard line, or even worse, 4th and goal from the 3, right? Do you take the field goal or do you punch it in do you go for the 4th down play? That's a coaching decision. So often it becomes a special teams decision. When you send the special teams unit out there to kick a field goal, but then they run a fake and get the touchdown, that's a coaching move. So it's a good place to have our coaching intangibles in there. It's not everything to do with coaching. That's not the only time coaches coach, but it's sometimes one of the places where we see the most impactful or direct decisions that the coach is making in the game. So it's just a good place as we evaluate to say, look, we're going to put coaching, intangibles, special teams, all that together in one category, and then we're going to do offense and defense in the others. So just by the numbers, let's start with the Georgia offense versus the Bama defense, or we can actually just go defense and talk about where they are. These teams are pretty similar on paper. Bama is got a profound edge on paper if you look at one of the things that I really like to look at and talked about before, which is yardage differential. Game control stats. What are the game control stats? Yardage differential is a big one. Well, Bama is winning the yardage differential compared to Georgia. And a lot of that has to do with who they played and what these last games were. Because again, both of us, even though this is week 5 of the season, we both had the off week last week. We've only played 3 games so far then. So our stats, even compared to the rest of football, who all the teams that played last week and all the first 3 weeks as well. So you got a bunch of teams out there that have already played 4 games, a couple who've already played 5 games, and we've only played 3. So one game can vastly skew the stats. That's one of the problems. I made this comment before. As much as I love stats and rely on data, it's very hard to look at stats at this early in the season and draw a ton of conclusions from. In fact, in college football, you almost can hardly judge stats until you get to the end because you just don't have enough sample size if you're really talking about an appropriate sample size. So we also look back then at last year, and we're going to compare last year. But what's going on right now this year? Right now, Alabama is winning the yardage differential comfortably. They're averaging about 460 yards a game, and they're giving up an average of about 246 a game. So that's great. That's an elite level. Now, again, that's just the 3 games, and 2 of those games they've totally outgunned their opponent. And in the other game that they didn't outgun their opponent, they lost. And in that game, though, they didn't give up a ton of yards. Florida State only gained about 380 something yards. They gained about 350. So the yardage differential was essentially a wash in that game. So statistically speaking, Bama's yardage differential, they're hanging their hat on the game against Northeast Louisiana and Wisconsin. And that's definitely worked in their favor. Georgia, on the other hand, we have a nice yardage differential, but not quite as elite. We're averaging 470 yards a game on offense, so a little bit more than Bama, but we're also giving up more on defense. They're giving up 246, which is a very elite number. We're giving up a comfortably, respectfully 299 and change. We're just just that smidgen under 300, which, below 300 is like, okay, that's a good defense. That's a top 1/3 defense in the country when you give up 300 yards or less than 300 yards. Over 300 yards, you start to be in that group that's in the middle third of defenses. So right now, 3 games into the season, we're giving up 299 point whatever. So we're just under the 300. So 299 and 470 yards on offense. So not as big a gap. We're not outgaining people by 250 a game, but almost, we're approaching 170, 180 a game, and that's good. And again, looking at those games, we had 2 patsy games. We were all a little frustrated with how those played out, but ultimately we actually outgained. We did the yardage well in those games. In both games, we outgained even the Austin Peay game, which felt very frustrating to watch. We talked about that. We made the point though, but we put up over 430 yards in that game, and we held them under 200 yards. So we had a nice yardage differential. We just didn't convert on the scoreboard in that game. So, and ultimately, Marshall, we might have, compared to what other people were doing, we might have wanted to see 70-0 beatdowns, but we don't really do that. We've made that point before too. So we comfortably outgained Marshall by a long margin and won that game 45-7. So, but Tennessee, not much of an outgain. We did outgain them. They had like 496 yards and we had 502. So we outgained them by about 5 yards. Again, the differential didn't really change that much statistically, but it really ballooned up our numbers coming into the Tennessee game. In the first 2 games, we were only giving up 200 yards a game on average, and Tennessee tacked 100 yards onto that average basically because they put up nearly 500 yards. And so that's one of our big concerns as we're breaking this down. We say, well, gee, once we played a really good team, they torched us on, put up 500 yards offense. They scored 38 points in regulation, 41 overall. How's that going to play out? But so that's where we are right now. So, and Bama's averaging about almost 43 points a game on offense, giving up only 15 points a game on defense. Georgia's averaging about 39 points a game on offense and only giving up about 18 points a game. So Bama has, when you look on paper right now, they look a little stronger in terms of their point differential, their yardage differential. They're scoring more points and giving up less. All of their numbers are in the elite category. Their yardage differential, over 40 points a game scored on offense, that's elite. Under 15 or under points a game, that's elite. So we're up at 18. We're creeping up to that good defense range. In that 18 or 20 points a game. Usually is, again, an upper third, maybe top 50 defense. When you look at by the end of the season, if you're giving up 18, 20 points a game, that's where we are right now. We were giving up 6.5 points a game coming into the Tennessee game. Again, they hung 41 on us. So they added 12 points a game to our average with just only 3 games to look at. Alabama, despite having lost to Florida State, and that score looked a little lopsided. I mean, they lost by 2 scores, 31-17, but then they beat Louisiana Monroe 73-0, and they beat Wisconsin 38 to something, I forgot, 38-14 or something like that, 38-13. So they've created some lopsided wins that keep their stats looking good. So that's where the stats are. Now, here's one thing that jumps out at me in those stats is that while Bama is putting up a very elite 43 points a game in points, you might have heard me say they're only averaging about 459, 460 yards a game on offense compared to Georgia putting up 470. So Georgia has been, you might say that Alabama's been more efficient. They've gotten more points out of less yardage, and it's not a big differential. Georgia's averaging about 3 yards or about 10 yards a game more than they are, but that 470 number for Georgia really pops, though. I mean, last year we were only averaging 405, 410 a year for the season. So 470 is a nice step forward. Now, what we haven't seen is just a big explosion, right? Like you might have thought we'd put up 600 yards against Marshall and Austin Peay. Well, we didn't. It was like 488, 430, and then against Tennessee, 502. But this goes back to something I've been saying all season. We play our game. That's the way Kirby coaches, is we're going to play our game. Doesn't matter who the opponent is, doesn't matter what their ranking is, doesn't matter their win streaks or whatever else they're doing. We play our game. And we're going to play our game, and it's going to lead to, if we do our job right, it's going to lead to pretty consistent results time in and time out. And so we don't expect to see us explode. So I think it's worth noting that our average actually, with the one team that we played so far that really could be considered a challenging team, our yardage and our point average on offense went up. And we all came out of that game. We came into that game watching the first two games and we said, can Gunner be the quarterback of a team that's expected to contend? And we all came out of that game saying, hey, Gunner can ball, man. And it's not just us, and it's just one game, but almost everybody in the country, like all the talking heads, the analysts, the national media, you look around, almost everybody came out of that and saying, hey, Gunner can play. So the idea isn't even that we're holding Gunner to the standard of did he have to do it for 10 games? Everybody basically saw enough to say, look, if you can do it in any game, if you can go on the road against a solid SEC defense and lead your team to 500 yards of offense and 40 or more points, if you could do it one game and look that good, you can do it anytime. Now, that doesn't mean you'll do it every time, right? You might get shut down. You might have a terrible game. Somebody's defense may absolutely make you look silly. And that happens from time to time. And it might happen to us this season. But we at least now can say, hey, he can do it. We know that he could go out there when it needs to be done and do it. So now we say, look, that's another check in the box for Georgia. There's the there's the ability. You got the tools in the toolbox to get it done. So, all right. So what does this all mean? We kind of, where are that? So that's the sort of the review of the defense. So like we said, it comes down to these matchups. So again, a little bit like we said coming into Tennessee, these numbers are a little fictitious. They're very small sample size. Both teams have only played one Power 5 team in here that we're going to take really seriously. They've only played 3 games when other teams have already played 4. This is the 4th game for them. So we're going to know a lot more about these teams after this game than we know going in. So a little bit like Tennessee, we're having to look at the numbers and kind of guess. And so part of what we do is we're going to look back at last year too, and we're going to come to some conclusions and say, well, what do we think is going to happen? So let's talk about, first and foremost, let's talk about the Georgia offense versus the Bama defense. So both defenses have been good. Overall, their numbers are solid, right? We got torched more than they did. In our best win against the best team we played, we got torched defensively, almost 500 yards, over 40 points. In their loss against a legitimate FSU power team, they gave up 31 points, but less than 400 yards. So they didn't get torched. But if you watch the game, they got pushed around, and we talked about that a lot. And we already broke that down early in the week, and we said, look, we could do what FSU, if that's the pattern to best beat Alabama, we can do what FSU did to Alabama, because they had a gritty, tough quarterback who was their leading rusher, and he made some big throws when it was necessary to keep drives moving. And they they only had 10 drives in the game, but that helped them as much as it hurt, as much as it might have helped Alabama too, because they shortened the game and they were super efficient and they scored regularly. So we look at that as a model and we say, look, our offense, and I think this is what I just was starting just a few moments ago, what I was alluding to or about to say here. Look, I have a ton of confidence coming out of the Tennessee game in our offense. I told you coming into the Tennessee game that we play our game. And so I wasn't bothered, what I was just saying, I wasn't bothered that we didn't crank up 600 yards against lesser teams. I said, let's see what we do here. Well, we actually, again, we played our game, and with the focus and the energy that comes with playing an elite team versus a practice team. Okay, to be kind as I can to Marshall and Austin Peay. Those are essentially glorified practice or preseason games. So when we get our focus and we're playing a team, a contender, somebody that, a rival on the road, well, the offensive execution was excellent, right? We scored on more than half our drives. I'm thinking that's true. I have to go back and double check that. But we broke that down in the Tennessee game. We scored efficiently, and we put a lot of yards up, and we did it both. We had an entire drive that was running. We had entire drives that were passing. We showed versatility. Okay, we could answer whatever was given to us. If they wanted to take the run away from us, well, we could chunk it down the field and beat them with some good passing and long passing too, not just the screen passes and the short passes, right? Although the screen pass and the short pass, as much as everybody's groused about those, I can't, no more screen passes. Well, one of our early touchdowns was yet again a screen pass, right? And when you got Zachariah Branch and you can get him out on the edge and he just has to beat one defender, maybe that screen pass is a more dynamic play than we're giving it credit for, right? Plus, it makes the defense have to go wide. If you can move the defense out of the middle of the field, a defense always wants to look for something, or at least, let's put it this way. What I've learned listening to Kirby Smart talk about football in the last 10 years, and it's not that I hadn't heard this before, but he emphasized it, and he is a defensive guru, and our teams are usually defensive led, right? So what Kirby talks about, and we've emphasized this, we talked about how one of the reasons we fell off and didn't look like what we thought we should look like last year was that we did not run the ball as well as we're used to seeing Georgia run, and we did not defend the run as well as we're used to seeing Georgia run. And just sort of 30 to 50 yards a game in both directions, giving up 30 to 50 yards a game more in rushing and not gaining less, 30 to 50 yards less a game in rushing. That combination eliminated a lot of the game control and the power of Georgia football seeming to just take the will out of the other team and grind out games and just look inevitable. That sense that, that Georgia inevitably is going to win this game, even if it starts slow, they will just grind it out and win by a couple scores because the other team doesn't have the power to match. And we lacked that last year, and that's why Kirby has emphasized this year fire, passion, energy as the slogan for this year's team, and we've seen that so far on the field. Even in the win against Tennessee with all the yards the defense gave up, there were still a lot of times where the defense played hard, played with fire, passion, energy, and they made enough plays to help us win that game. So what's going to happen in this thing? Now, let's talk about the defense. In this game, what I'm getting at is I've developed a lot of confidence in our offense. They look multiple, as Kirby likes to say. We can throw it, we can run it. Our wide receiver core has definitely been upgraded this year. We've seen that enough this year. Zachariah Branch is dangerous, either catching the ball over the middle or as a screen pass. We haven't seen just as many pure heat takeoff, like fly pattern deep field passes, but we have seen him catch an important first down or two on a slant over the middle. We've seen him take those screen passes and turn them into explosive plays and touchdowns. So Zachariah Branch is a meaningful addition to the game. And so has London Humphreys, who was an addition last year. Didn't come on as much last year. He's making impacts this year, even though he had a fumble in one of the games. He was key. I mean, that the way he shielded the defender on that 4th and 6 touchdown to tie the game near the end was beautiful execution of that play. I mean, perfect throw by Gunner, but a perfect setup for catching the ball too. Getting your body in control, catch the ball, shield out the defender, make sure your whole body's in before you get out of bounds. Just perfect execution. Colby Young coming back on the team has provided both a deep option and a nice outside option, a guy who can jump ball with anybody who's got the size and hands. We're not seeing the drops from the team that we saw before. The tight ends have still been a little less effective than I think we're all as much as Georgia has always been known as running back U, after a succession of great quarterbacks, sort of culminating in tight ends, culminating in Brock Bowers. We're all waiting to see, just a tight end explosion, and we haven't quite seen that yet. But Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky have looked really good, and so have some of the other guys in there. They're doing a good job blocking. They've made some key plays here and there, and I continue to expect them to have more impact on the games as we go, especially if teams start to try to key on, say, Zachariah Branch in the screenplay. If you try to get out there and particularly key on that screen pass to the outside, well, I suspect that would free up a tight end right over the middle, right? So I think that we still have a lot of room in the offense for things we haven't even seen yet. We haven't seen a lot of passing to the running backs yet, a few checkdowns here and there, but we haven't seen as many wheel routes either from the tight end and the running backs as you might expect. And so I think there's still a lot more to come from this offense. I think it has a lot more to give. And Noah Thomas has been targeted a few times. He was another big transfer, but he's out there on the field. He's I don't know if we want to call it starting, but he's out there from the get-go a lot. And so the coaches like what they see with him in practice. And so far it seems like, look, the wide receivers are blocking. Another thing you see on those screen passes getting yards is one wide receiver is catching it. That means another 2 wide receivers are out there blocking it, and they're blocking. When you see a screen pass go for 8 yards down the sideline, it's nice individual effort from a guy like Colby Young or Zachariah Branch, but it's also nice blocking effort from the other wide receivers. And that sometimes goes unnoticed. But if you think back, we've been seeing good downfield blocking. So I think what we see that the tight end, the offensive group as a whole, tight ends and wide receivers are vastly improved. We're not dropping as many balls, and we're creating more consistent plays. We haven't seen as much explosive. We had more explosive plays against Tennessee than we did against Austin Peay and Marshall combined, I think. But and maybe that's a sign of things to come when we need to. We're going to see the explosive plays in the big games. But I think that what you have seen is you've seen an offense that doesn't stop itself, that controls the ball. And we are number 5 in the nation. I heard somebody say, I didn't look this up. I knew we were, I've been telling you time and time again, we're crushing it on time of possession. Well, we're 5th in the nation on time of possession in terms of holding the ball. We're like 33, 34 minutes a game. So our offense may not have up to this point been just bombing it down the field, but I've also made the point that a lot of times when you're just bombing it down the field, even if you build a big lead, you still got a lot of clock on the timer left for the other team to keep responding. And if you can't, and you put your defense out there for a ton of plays. So that complementary football that we play or want to play that helps our defense is also something the offense is really doing well this year. So they may not look as dynamic so far as some of the offenses you've seen in the last 3 or 4 years, but they haven't had less than 430 yards a game. They're averaging 470 yards a game. They're averaging 39 points a game. It kind of doesn't matter who they're playing. They just kind of keep doing that. We've seen them emphasize different things, but at the moment they can run, they can pass. And Gunner, while he has been, and again, I've encouraged you to go look at Aaron Murray's content. He does the Mac and Murray podcast during the week with the fella from Clemson, who used to be an offensive lineman, but he also does his own film studies that you can find on YouTube, and he's broken down each of Gunner's games like he has a lot of the other quarterbacks in the nation. And you can see, look, Gunner's left some reads out there. He's missed some he's not targeted some possible open reads that could have been explosive plays that we saw early in the season. He hit those more in the Tennessee game. And even in the Tennessee game, there's a couple chances where maybe he could have passed more effectively, or he gave up on some plays a little early. He bails out of the pocket a little quicker than we might want him to. But when he does, the other thing Gunner does is Gunner consistently gets yards. I mean, most all the time, even when he bailed out of play. And I saw a great example, and I told you about this, that Aaron Murray called this out. Even when he bailed out of a play that had big potential because he got out of the pocket too early and the play opened up and he probably could have had a bigger hitter. Well, Gunner ends up pulling the ball out, stepping up through the pocket, and then running out to the sideline. Well, he gained about 3 yards, 2 or 3 yards. So it was first down, and then it was 2nd and 7 or 2nd and 8. Again, that's not awesome, but so many times last year, we were either 15 yards downfield or a 1 or 3 yard loss. And when a play didn't come together, a lot of times we weren't able to get anything out of it last year or two. So Gunner has sort of making the offense be this thing that consistently grinds and moves forward. And again, I think that that's going to be a key this week against Alabama. So the formula, here's what's interesting. So, well, I'll get back to that in a second. I think the main idea is I think our offense has been able to grind out against anybody. Alabama's defense has looked okay on paper, and there's been a lot of consternation about our defense. But I noticed that Alabama only has 4 sacks on the year too. Okay, so their defenses look good and the numbers are solid, but they're giving up an average of 130 yards a game, I think, rushing. And I think that they've been hurt a little bit. They were hurt in the FSU game by a running quarterback, and we have a quarterback who can run as well. So our quarterback has not always made the most explosive play decision, but the decision that he's made has almost always kept the offense on the field, grinding out clock, gaining yards, and gaining points. And so, because just gaining yards and eating up clock without scoring isn't very effective. But if you can put 30-something points a game on the board, then I think you can do well with that. So, I mean, most of the time you're going to feel pretty good about gaining, about giving up. I mean, about scoring 30 or more points, and you're going to have a decent chance to win. So I was just looking up, Alabama is averaging giving up so far this season about 138 yards on season on the ground. We're averaging 200 yards or 209 yards on the ground. So I think that with Gunner being able to take some runs, I think the way our running backs are playing, and I think our line has been at its best, honestly, run blocking compared to pass blocking. So I don't think Alabama has been super stout against the run, so I expect our offense to succeed. I'm not going to say for sure they're going to, put 500 yards up and 45 points, but I think our offense can continue against this Alabama defense to do what it's done so far this season. And we have good reason to believe that. So I think when we look at the matchup of the Georgia offense versus the Alabama defense, I don't know if that's a huge strength or that's going to change, absolutely be the difference maker. But I think it's a win for Georgia in the sense that I think that Georgia will be able to do what it plans to do. I don't think there's anything about what Alabama has done defensively. Alabama historically under Nick Saban has been a great defensive team, right? But last year's team averaged giving up 320 yards a game. This year's team is only giving up 246 so far, but this year's team is averaging giving up 138 yards rushing, which is exactly where last year's team was. So they seem pretty consistent on that. We're emphasizing the run more. We have a quarterback who can help emphasize the run. In the Florida State loss this year, the combination of a quarterback who could run and throw proved to be very difficult for the Bama defense. They didn't get torched. They didn't even give up 400 yards, but they did give up 31 points, and those were almost all driven points, meaning there wasn't a pick six in there, and there wasn't a touchdown and a field goal that came on turnovers, at their own 10-yard line. Those were mostly points that Florida State drove the field and scored. So, I think Georgia can expect to drive the field and be successful on offense. So that's the first matchup of the Georgia offense versus the Alabama defense. So then the next key matchup is, well, what about the Georgia defense against the Alabama offense? Well, I think chances are that's going to be one that I guess my first impression is, look, Alabama's offense has been prolific so far. Okay. Not elite. Again, it's interesting to note they're not putting up 500 yards plus a game. Tennessee's still averaging over 500 yards a game after playing us, right? They were before, they still are. They're averaging 500 and something yards a game. That's elite. 460 yards a game, Tennessee or Alabama's averaging is, top 20 kind of level, but not top 10. And the 43 points is, if you could average 43 points on the season, you'll be in the top 10 by the end of the season, most likely. But so their point differential is outdoing their yardage. And I'm not sure there's a clear reason why, but what I will say about the Alabama offense that's concerning is the exact opposite of what I just said. Despite the fact that they've played fairly weak competition, Alabama is only averaging 124 yards a game rushing right now. Now, one of the things that was concerning is it's been reported that Jam Miller, who is their starting running back or their elite, they had their two top running backs from last year were Jam Miller and Justice Haynes. And so again, Justice was a guy I wish had come to Georgia, followed in the steps of his father, Ron Haynes, who played at Georgia and had the memorable hobnail boot play. And he has been crushing it at Michigan. He went to Michigan. He transferred from Alabama to Michigan. He's got over 500 yards on the season. He hasn't failed to have a 100-yard game yet, and he's had like a 70-yard touchdown in every game. So he's killing it, and we would have loved to have seen him in our backfield. And he was in the Alabama backfield last year, but he didn't have that kind of. He only had about 400. He's already got more yards at Michigan in 4 games this year than he had in Alabama, I think, last year. I could be wrong about that, but it's pretty close. He's really been very dynamic for Michigan. So Jam Miller is their top returning back. They have some other highly rated backs, recruits and stuff that are there in the backfield. But thus far, they've only had one game where they've gotten over 100 yards rushing. I mean, they're only averaging 124 yards a game. And last year they averaged 173 yards a game rushing. But last year they had Milroe, who was also a guy who can and would run a lot. And so Milroe averaged between 55 and 60 yards a game and had a lot of games where he got more than that. So they seem to be literally missing exactly the Milroe component. Ty Simpson, the quarterback, is not a statue back there. He's gained like 50 yards on the season. He's got one rushing touchdown. So he's averaging about 15 yards positive a game, which is great because a lot of quarterbacks, if they're really statuesque, basically either gain nothing or average losing yards because in college football, the sack yardage comes away. So he's avoided sacks, I guess, and he's got positive yardage on the season. Not a lot, but he's not been a deficit. He's at least a positive, but he's not the positive that Jalen Milroe was. So without the Jalen Milroe factor in the offense this year, Bama is literally rushing just for those first three games at exactly what they did last year minus Milroe, right? So without Milroe or with Milroe, they averaged 173 yards a game. This year, they're averaging 124 yards a game. And when I heard the news that Jam Miller, who's been out since the preseason with a broken collarbone, was coming back for this game, I thought, well, great. Just in time, they're going to get their running game going again. But I noticed something interesting, too, about Jam Miller. And, I don't want to sound like I'm just picking on somebody, but he really has not been a very dynamic a player. I mean, the fact that he's coming back as their starting rusher, that's obviously probably going to help them. And they probably will run better. They'll have more options now. But Jam Miller only had 100-yard game last season, and that was against University of South Florida. He had 15 carries for 140 yards. And in fact, he basically averages his career, or his average last season was 4.6 yards a carry, decent. He had 7 touchdowns. But in most of the games, he was really right at about the 30 to 40 yard a game mark. Against us, it didn't help us win that game, but against us, he had 5 carries for 8 yards. But in the loss against Vanderbilt, he had 5 carries for 45 yards. In the loss to Oklahoma, he had 12 carries for 45 yards. In the loss to Michigan, he had 10 carries, 27 yards. In the loss to Tennessee, he had 12 carries, 42 yards. And I'm carrying out the losses. In the win against South Carolina, they had 12 carries, 42 yards. In the win against LSU, he had 13 carries, 38 yards. So even coming back as a starting running back, this isn't a guy that, now that I'm seeing his stats, I mean, I was like, oh no, they're getting a starting running back. Now they're going to be a better running team. Well, they probably will be a better running team. I mean, he's starting for a reason, but their run game has not been very dynamic, and it wasn't that dynamic last year without Milroe, okay? You take Milroe out of the equation, they're only averaging 125 yards a game. Without Milroe this year, they're only averaging 125 yards a game. They lost Justice Haynes, who maybe would have exploded as a feature back if they'd gone that direction, because you look at what he's doing at Michigan. I guess that's why he left. He wanted to be featured. He didn't feel like the Alabama run game was giving him the chance to be what he should be, and he looks like he was correct in that regard. And so he's being featured now, and he's killing it. So I don't feel, and what has our offense, or what has our defense done well so far this year? Our defense has been very effective at stopping the run. It's another emphasis for this year. It goes with the whole fire, passion, energy. Play with passion and energy up front, and we're going to stop giving up on the run. We talked about that differential already, and how we'd been giving up about 130 yards a game, which isn't terrible. That's what we did last year. But historically, the championship seasons and even the non-championship seasons, we averaged only giving up 78 yards a game on average over a 5 or 6 year period. And then in 2023, despite having the 12-0 record in the regular season, we saw that creep up to where we gave up over 100 yards a game for the first time in a season average in 5 years. That was kind of shocking. And a couple of teams had some nice running totals against us. Still, we were an undefeated team and looked pretty powerful. Last year, we didn't look as powerful, and we slipped all the way down to where we're giving up 130 yards a game, and we're only averaging 124 ourselves. So right now, we're averaging 209, and we're only giving up about 80 a game. And so, again, limited competition. But Tennessee, going back to what we talked about Tennessee isn't just a throw it all over the yard offense. And one of the things that hurt Tennessee in the game against us, one of the reasons they couldn't salt the game away, and we had the opportunity to get back into it down a couple scores, was they were not able to just start running the ball and grind clock. And Josh Heupel, to his credit, knows you have to run the ball. He actually, you would call it a run-focused spread option, I guess, as part of how that offense might be described. And they average over the last couple of years under Heupel over 200 yards a game rushing. Well, we held them to 124. And as I highlighted in the breakdown of the Tennessee, really they got about 60 of the 120 yards in the game against us, all in the last two drives. So at halftime, they only had 30 yards rushing. And that's part of why we were able to get back into that game, is because with a 21-7 lead, they were not able to take the ball and just start grinding it and eat some clock. In fact, that's one of the big problems. They didn't eat any clock at all. The time of possession differential was huge in that game. We just had much more time with the ball to work out what we needed to do. So Bama offense against the Georgia defense. Well, Georgia defense has been torched against the pass, and it looks scary because Ty Simpson has been electric after his first game, okay? And even with the first game, he wasn't terrible in the game against FSU. If you watch the game, he wasn't the reason they lost. They got beat on the lines, and he was running for his life. And even with that, he completed about 50-something% of his passes, had a couple hundred yards, didn't make any terrible mistakes. He just wasn't great. Okay, so the Alabama offense versus the Georgia defense. Well, we've seen the Georgia defense look great and then get torched against Tennessee. But we only really got torched in one category, which was deep passes. Tennessee didn't consistently connect on a lot of small passes. They did. They look, their passing game was great all throughout. But we didn't get beat on a collection of small passes and ball control. We got beat because we lost one-on-one matchups. And in most cases, we lost matchups where guys were there. Where we saw a couple of those touchdowns, their first touchdown in the second half. Our defensive back is right there. Actually looks like, I was almost celebrating as that play was developing because I thought we were going to intercept that ball. I thought, here we go, intercept the deep ball. We've already taken a lead. We're grinding it out on them. Now we're going to intercept this ball, turn around, drive the other way. This is our game. I'm feeling all that in that moment when I'm watching that ball float down. And then I watched their guy jump up and our guy jump up. And somehow, even though we had position and the ball looked like it was thrown to our defensive back, their guy jumps up, catches the ball, our guy falls down, and he walks into the end zone. And I'm just like, how did that happen? And that happened like 3 times. There was one long touchdown where it was just a total bust, where they went quick. Again, they were on that quick fire. They got a first down on the run, and then they turned around on the next play, and they gashed us for a 36-yard touchdown, and just nobody was in the area. But 3 of the touchdowns were, we had guys there, and it was one-on-one. It could have gone either way, and our guy was in a position to win at least twice and just didn't, and they won. So look, Ty Simpson Aguilar doesn't have a strong arm. Ty Simpson has a stronger arm, and he's less likely to just hang the ball in the air like that. And yet, he's also probably less likely to take some of those shots. Aguilar looks like a guy who might read the defense, and even if it doesn't look right, he's still going to throw it. And that's probably part of the reason he had so many interceptions at App State that we talked about before. Simpson is much more careful with the ball. So I think if our defensive positioning can be good, I think if we can show that we've got coverage, and I think if we, the big question is, can we get pressure? Do I think Simpson's going to hit some hit some passes? Do I think Jeremy Bernard and Williams are going to have some plays and some big plays? Yeah, I think they are. And they've had big plays even in the games that they've lost. But I think our defense is going to be able to continue to take away the run and make Alabama one-dimensional. And I started saying that before. Kirby is big on taking something away from a team and then working from there. And when our defense can do that, and we did that against Tennessee, but then we still didn't get enough pressure. So that's where we got hurt. So that's what a lot of people, you heard, and I mentioned David Pollock talking about not seeing guys who can win up front to get pressure. They're not winning up front to get pressure, but they are stopping the run. But one thing I think might be true. Now, this is just speculation. There's nothing on paper to say this is going to happen. But my speculation is what has happened so far this year. We've seen this team continue to show grit and response. What was the big question coming into the Tennessee game? Could our offense be dynamic? Could our offense pass the ball downfield? Could Gunner be the guy at quarterback? He answered that on the first play, right? And then continued to answer throughout the game. I wouldn't be surprised if our pass rush guys, our defensive front 7, have been hearing about how they got torched and how they got no pass rush. They've heard David Pollock challenge them and say there's nobody up front who can win. I bet you there's some guys out there when the light show starts at Sanford Stadium and it's dark and it's getting darker earlier, so there's still going to be a little daylight at 7:30, but by the time we're halfway into the first quarter and definitely second quarter, it's going to be full dark. You're going to have the light show. You're going to have the pyrotechnics. You're going to have the crowd fired up. By the time everything. And again, like we talked about, Alabama has not performed. Where their losses come, all 5 of the losses in the short Kalen DeBoer era so far are either on the road or neutral site. So they're already up against it. They're coming into a big crowd. All the games, that's a difference maker. Almost all the games that we've talked about in this run lately were Alabama, and all the Kirby Smart coach games. Kirby Smart is 1-6 against Alabama. We didn't focus on that as much. We talked about this sort of longer history of Alabama. Kirby Smart's 1-6 against Alabama. All of those games have been on the road or at Alabama. So this is Kirby's first chance to have a game at home. So again, what's the trend? The trend has been, now trends sometimes get busted, and you hear that a lot. This is the trend. Everybody says, yeah, I think this is what's going to happen because there's a trend. Then after the game, like, wow, look, the trend was busted. But you got 2 significant trends. Right now, Alabama under Kalen DeBoer struggling on the road neutral site. All their losses, that's where they're coming from. And it's not a trivial amount. It's not 1 or 2 losses. It's 5. 5 in a season and 3 games. So, which is way below the Alabama standard. What's the trend at Georgia? 33 straight home wins. Haven't lost a game at home since South Carolina in 2019. Okay. So, so I think once everything starts going against them and the defense has the crowd and the energy and the fire and the passion, I just suspect that this is going to be a time, just like Gunner answered right at the beginning of the game last time out. I think the defense is going to answer this time. Now, I'm not saying they're going to dominate, and I'm not predicting yet that, look, we're going to blow them out. We're going to have 7 sacks. But I think that it has happened before. I didn't go back and look it up, but I remember a few years ago coming into a big game where it was much talked about how how Georgia had not had a lot of sacks, that the defense was playing well, but they had only had 12 sacks on the season or whatever. It was about midway through the season. And we exploded for like 5, 6, 7 sacks in one game, and then had another game in a big game where we had 3 or 4 sacks. And again, you're not going to see us. We weren't trying to get a lot of sacks against Austin, Peay, and Marshall. We're not going to use our best moves. The guys need to practice and get home. I'm not saying that, and they should be winning up front like David Pollock was talking about. But you're not pulling out all the stops. And the Tennessee game is a little bit different because their offense is so different, like we talked about, the way they spread you out and the way they're intentional. And so they forced us into some stuff. And you heard Kirby make mention of that a little bit. Look, Tennessee is unique. You didn't see or hear as much from Raylan Wilson and C.J. Allen. He said he thought they played well in the Tennessee game, but the nature of the game or the structure of the game kind of meant that we didn't hear their names called a lot. So I just think Alabama will be successful. I think they'll be able to move the ball. I think they're going to put up some points. I think maybe Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard both have big catches and big moments. I'm not saying they're both going to go off for 100 yards and 50 touchdowns or whatever. But I think that, it is scary that they have at least 3 dynamic and dangerous wide receivers. They got a quarterback who's crazy accurate, and they've been playing pretty decent on offensive line. But I don't think they're going to be able to consistently run the ball. I think we will take that away from them and make them one-dimensional. And so the game is going to come down to being on Ty Simpson's shoulders. And one thing about Kalen DeBoer, we were talking about him a little bit in his style. One thing that going back to my thinking about his culture and how he fits at Alabama, and one of the things I think I've seen, and I won't bother to read you all the stats on it, but I've read through his games at Washington. I just kind of read through the box scores, and I read through the box scores of all the games since he's been here at Alabama. And what I see is his coaching style, especially offensively, and he is an offensive-minded guy. He was the offensive coordinator at Indiana and some other places before he jumped to head coach. His offensive style is to really put the game on his quarterback's shoulders. The quarterback yes, at Washington, they had a running back that had, 1,200, 1,300 yards combined between passing and running in that 14-1 season at Washington in 2023. But when you look at Michael Penix's stats, and, if you're a crossover Georgia/Falcons fan, then you're concerned about, is Michael Penix going to be the guy or not? We're putting a lot of eggs in that basket as a Falcons team. But he put the game in Penix's hands. And of course they had 2 NFL wide receivers. And I mentioned that before. Largely their playbook was, 30-yard fades to NFL wide receivers against college level cornerbacks and winning that matchup. But and yeah, they ran the ball here and there, and they gained some yards, and they had a guy who had some nice stats at running back. But primarily, 85% of the offense was generated through Michael Penix in that season. I mean, it was just Penix putting the ball in the air and getting it to the outside to the wide receivers. And then when nothing's there, he took off and ran a little bit here and there. And you just look at the stats, and they're really top heavy. And when you look at any set of stats for the offense for all of the Kalen DeBoer teams the last 4 or 5 years, wherever he's been, the quarterback line is just, you look at it and it's eye-popping. He puts the game on the quarterback. And so I think that plays well into our defense, because Kirby craves the opportunity to take something away from you. And so I think that is, he's going to take away the run, and I don't think they're going to get much run. Ty Simpson is not a runner, and that's taken away a certain dynamic aspect of their offense. Jam Miller is going to be back, but it does not look like Jam Miller is necessarily the answer to Alabama having a dynamic run game. And so it's going to be on Ty Simpson. And the matchup then is going to be the Georgia front seven. Are we going to make him uncomfortable? We don't have to sack him. We've talked about that before. We just have to make him move. I don't think he was sacked a ton of times against Florida State either. I didn't pull up that stat, but I watched the game. I don't remember him being sacked a lot, but what I do remember was that he was not comfortable. He was on the move. And so he had a couple hundred yards passing, but he also only completed about 50% of his passes. Well, the last 2 games, he's been as comfortable as, he looked like he's at the library reading a book back there. Nobody, Louisiana Monroe and Wisconsin didn't get any pressure on him, and his stats showed it. So the good news is, look, this isn't to take anything away from him. Like I've said before, if you can go 17 of 17 against air, just throw in. If I just went out in a park with a couple buddies, I'm not going to hit 17 passes over 10 yards. I'm going to miss 2 or 3. Just if my guy's just running out there and I'm just throwing the ball to him. So that's phenomenal accuracy. And it probably shows great discipline and footwork, and he's obviously a great quarterback. He's got a strong arm, he's very accurate. But like any other quarterback, if you can make him move and make him uncomfortable, you don't even have to sack him, take away his time, then you shorten the routes that the guys can run. You make them play shorter routes. And if you make them play shorter routes and they don't have a run game, we see that a lot. There's a lot of quarterbacks who come in against Georgia, and maybe they had 230 yards passing, but they did it on 50% completion, and they threw 40, 50 passes to get to that. So they averaged, 4 or 5 yards a pass. And that's what happened against FSU for Ty Simpson. He was decent in the game, but they only averaged 5.3 yards a pass attempt in the game. Well, that's, if we can do that to them, if they don't have any run game and we can slow the game down like that, then I think we will be effective. Do I think they will be effective? Yeah, I think they'll get some hit. Like I said, I think they'll make some plays. I think there'll be a bust or two. There's no reason to think that our guys, I think our defensive backs are also going to be motivated to play better. And I think they're going to play better by the nature of the game. Because like I said, I don't think Simpson's going to put the ball in danger as much as Aguilar did. Aguilar put the ball in danger and just hoped his guy won, and they did. And this is another thing, by the way, I've talked about for a long time. If you've talked to me before, you heard me say it. If I was playing Georgia, if I was playing a Kirby Smart coach team, and if I was playing Georgia any of the last couple of years, especially you go back to 2021, 2022, I would have come into the game bombing on every play. I know that people worry about getting blown out, and they say, well, we got to run the ball some to keep the defense honest. We got to eat a little clock. We can't afford to just have the time of possession. Georgia's going to win the time of possession, but we can't make it worse. We can't, only have the ball 15 minutes and they have it 45 minutes. That's ridiculous. Most of those games a few years ago, like I said, were foregone conclusions, and you weren't going to win. And you're not going to move the ball down the field consistently against those defenses that were giving up less than 100 yards rushing. You're not just going to grind clock and get first downs. You're not going to get 7 first downs and score a touchdown. You might do it once in a game against Georgia, or even twice, but you're not going to do it 4 times or 5 times, which is what it would take to win the game. So last year, we saw that fall back because we were giving people some yardage. They were getting first downs. They were eating a little more clock. They were taking some possession time away from us. So that we look like we've corrected that this time. So I feel confident that the defense can win on the run. I feel confident that the defense is going to do better against the pass, even though I think this quarterback and wide receivers are better. I think they're less likely to take gamble chances like Aguilar did. And I think they're more likely to be a team that reads and takes what the defense gives them. And I think our defense is going to give them what we want to give them, which is a typical way that the Kirby Smart defense plays. So I think we're much more likely to produce the kind of results like Florida State had. So what's going to happen there? I think Bama could end up putting 17, 20, maybe even 27 points on the board. Question is, how much do we put up on offense, right? But I think they have the ability to put anywhere from 10 to 27 points on the board. I think they're going to have the ability to get over 300 yards of offense, maybe as much as 385. I don't think this time we let them. I mean, last time they torched us, okay, and they got over 500, almost 550 yards of offense. So I don't think that's going to happen this time. So I just think, even though our defense didn't look as electric last week, and you think, why would you think this defense is going to play better than last? I just think that all the factors I just described are going to work to the fact that Alabama will be effective in getting some points and yards, primarily through the air, but I don't think that's going to be consistent enough to be 500 yards and 40-point kind of game. So I don't think we're going to get beat there, but I think that's what's going to happen in the Bama offense versus the Georgia defense. So the last category is the special teams and coaching. Special teams, I think, is a clear advantage. I mean, we have an unbelievable punter, and he's back, and he's only getting better and more healthy. He was great last time out, and I think he'll be great again this time. We have an automatic field goal kicker who hasn't missed anything that wasn't a long-reaching 50-something yard kick in 2 years. So I think, and I'm going to knock on wood, sorry for the rumble, but, just saying that out loud, I don't want to jinx them. So I think that they have a new kicker and a new punter. They lost both their guys. They were really good before, and they've lost those guys. They're breaking in new guys. I haven't read a lot about them. I don't know who they are. All I can tell you is I know they missed a kick in the FSU game, and that didn't help them. That's it wasn't probably why they lost, since they lost by 14, but it didn't help. So they missed a kick early in the game. And so I think it's just pretty straightforward. They're breaking in new guys. We've got veteran guys who are among the best in the country. They've got new guys who are not. We've also got, they may or may not have somebody who's good at returns, but, we are electric and dangerous. And I keep saying somewhere, some game, Zachariah Branch is going to, if not score a touchdown on a punt or a kick return, he's going to take one, to the 10 or something, and then we're going to score. And the momentum is going to be a huge change. I don't know if it'll be in this game or not, but I think at least once this season, there's going to be a game that's probably close, because, again, most of these games are probably going to be pretty close. That's the way the talent gaps are when you're playing tough teams like this. And one of these games, Zachariah Branch is going to bust something out on special teams, and it might flip and change the game. I'm not saying it's going to be this game, because who would know when that's going to be? I can't tell you when that's going to be. But it's going to happen in a game this year, and it could just as likely happen in this game as any other game. So just goes with the idea that I think we have a definitive edge at special teams. And then when we're putting the coaching and the intangibles in this, I think DeBoer has been a clever coach. Again, I think what his motto his MO has been, especially at Washington, is he puts the game on the quarterback. He tries to outgun you, and he tries to he'll steal a possession. Maybe he'll run a fourth down play. Maybe he'll run a trick play. Maybe, I don't know so much if they did a bunch of fake punts. I haven't always seen that, but I mean, he is willing to gamble here and there and make those tough choices. And a lot of times it has worked for him. And he's had a lot of games or a lot of shootouts. And so in those shootout games, he's been able to make those tough choices sometimes. And I give him credit as a game coach who's got a good flow for the game. And he has been able to win more shootouts than not. He's won a bunch of one-score games. So I would say, and he clearly knows a ton about football. You got to respect what he's been able to do as a football coach. So I give him a lot of credit. But Kirby Smart right now is, with Nick Saban retiring, he's the pinnacle of coaching. Now, Kirby's had some questionable calls, especially early in his career, some game management calls. But for the most part, and one might even say the decision to try to go for it against Notre Dame last year before the half, which led to the strip sack fumble that put Notre Dame up and got their first touchdown, put them up, more than a score ahead of us, or at least, up to 13-3. That decision, you could question, but that's a coin flip. I mean, it's easy in hindsight to say, you should have just taken a knee and gone to the halftime, just down 6-3. Okay, sure. You could say that, but whichever way, I don't think you can criticize that, say that was a bad choice. It was a choice. And it could have worked. It didn't work. It wasn't obvious that it was a dumb choice. So generally speaking, I'm going to say with what Kirby has accomplished, I think no matter what Kalen Boer's accomplished so far, Kirby is the advantage at the coaching. And I think Kirby is going to have a better overall game plan for managing this game. I would have thought so last year too, but last year things got out of, I think Kirby and the coaching gang showed real fortitude and an ability to keep their team in it and come back the way they came back last year. Everything went against them at the beginning, and it was a sort of a comedy of errors. DeBoer does a great job of scripting early, and I think he scripted early, and then it just sort of snowballed. But we righted the ship and came all the way back, and then blew it at the end. So, but that was some strong coaching performance. So I think DeBoer will have a good plan. I think they'll start well, but they might look great on that first drive, especially. They looked great on their first drive against Florida State, and then did nothing until Florida State was up 24-7. So we may see a similar thing. That may be the flow of this game. Maybe DeBoer on their first drive, whether they get the ball first or second, they may look great, and you may sit there thinking, oh my gosh, here we are. Their defense just got ripped. But they tend to look great on their first scripted drive. Let's see what happens when we get middle of the second quarter. Because remember, everything went right on their scripted plays, plus we threw an interception, plus we made some mistakes, plus our offense went nowhere. So everything snowballed, and Alabama was up 28-0. But that was all inside of one quarter and like one drive, okay? From the rest of the second quarter till the last part of the fourth quarter, we won the rest of that game, 31-7. So I'm not trying to make, something out of nothing with that. I'm just making the point that, look, I think DeBoer will come in with a game plan and look good, but I think Kirby and the coaching staff at Georgia has consistently been a staff that shows that they can make adjustments and figure out what's needed to win the game, even the last time out against Tennessee. So they come in with their game plan, but they still make adjustments. A lot of time that game plan has been awesome. Sometimes it didn't work, didn't work so great last week 2 weeks ago against Tennessee, didn't work last year against Alabama. In both cases, the team stayed with the coaching, came all the way back, and took the lead. They didn't hold it against Alabama. They took the game home against Tennessee, although that was tenuous too. So that's the situation. You put yourself in that situation, put yourself in a hole, and it comes down to one play here or there, then, you win some, you lose some like that. I mean, it basically, again, that's why we call them coin flip. I mean, when you get down to that close, then it basically is a coin flip. A missed field goal here and you win, a made field goal there and you win. A first down here and you close it out. A not getting a first down there and you got a punt, and then the other team gets the ball, and then they have a chance to win. So it's that close and it's that simple. So listen, I think that in the end, those are the matchups. The other thing that we talk about when we break down games, I'll just go through this real quick, as we say that there's what I like to look at it and say there's three true outcomes, right? There's Georgia could blow out Alabama, Alabama could blow out Georgia, or it's going to be a 50-50 game. So Vegas has already told you what they think, just like they did against Tennessee. They think it's a 50-50 game, basically. The line, if it stays at 2.5, that's under a field goal. So that's 50-50 as it gets, pretty much. What do we think about Alabama being able to blow us out? I don't think they can. I mean, they blew us out for a quarter last year and then should have lost. If we could have just not given up a 75-yard touchdown. I mean, look, Alabama was in the driver's seat in a way because we took a narrow lead in the game late and had to punt the ball back, or had to give the ball back on the kickoff. So Alabama had 2 minutes and a chance to, and I don't remember, let's see, we lost that game, whatever it was, let me think, it was 41-34. Okay. So we lost the game by 6 points and they scored the touchdown. So we were up, what was it? It was 34-31, I guess. So we were up a field goal, I guess, something like that. As basically, so they could have, it's possible that, I don't remember if a field goal would have tied the game or not or helped them win it, but they could have, we were in a precarious situation because they had the ball last and a chance to either win or tie or whatever. And they ended up, and they got the worst possible situation. Actually, it was the best for us. The one play at least meant that we still had a minute and a half, and it's easy to forget that part. I remember watching Ryan Williams catch that ball and then run for the 75-yard touchdown. Couldn't believe after all that we did good from the second, third quarter all the way to the to that moment in the fourth quarter, and then we give up another bomb, 75-yard touchdown. And I couldn't believe it. But yet we did get the ball back, and Carson Beck, I mean, the game ended with an interception in Alabama's end zone. So, I mean, we came all the way back down to, a touchdown could have won. I mean, again, 50-50 play. You put the ball up. Sometimes it's in harm's way. Aguilar against us, everything went his way. He pretty much got the 50-50 balls to go his way and had a chance to win the game. Carson Beck got a 50-50 ball in the end zone. It was a little underthrown, but he tried to throw it to our guy to jump up and get it. Didn't work out. It was intercepted in the end zone. If it goes the other way and we catch it, then it's an epic win, right? So again, that's all how these things come down to that one play. So point is, Alabama's best game against us under Kalen DeBoer was not a blowout. It was a game in which they threatened to blow us out, but we actually should have stolen the game. We had the chance to steal the game back. I guess you could say they won. They played more dominant early, and nobody really, I mean, that's what everybody remembers, is that they jumped on us early, we came back, and then they won. So maybe they deserved it. I don't know, whichever way. So I don't think Alabama's going to blow us out. The lack of a run game, and yes, they might hit some deep balls, just like Tennessee. They could win some 50-50 battles and get some bombs and put up some points. And their defense might be better than Tennessee's, but without the run game, they're going to leave us time to respond. And so I think no matter what happens, even if we fell behind and we have to fight to come back and we don't make it all the way back, I still think it's going to be a close game in the end. So I don't think Alabama can blow us out. Can we blow Alabama out? Maybe there's a slight better chance, just because if nothing else, we're at home. We'll have the night crowd, the fireworks, the light show, all the excitement of that. So I think that's a possibility, but I would say that's least likely. That's unlikely too. Maybe slightly more likely. So I guess if I have to put percentages on it, add it up to 100% like I did with Tennessee, I'd say, look, chances that Alabama blows us out, I'm going to leave that at like I did with Tennessee. I'm going to call that maybe a little higher. I'll give it 20%. Chances that we blow Alabama out, we'll call that 30%. Okay. So what does that leave us? That leaves us a 50% chance that it's going to be a coin flip game. And that's probably the most likely scenario. Like I said, that's where Vegas sees it. Vegas thinks it's a relatively low scoring game. The over under is still at about 53, 54. So they're still thinking like 30 to 27 or 30 to 24, 29, 26, something like that. That maybe feels about right. I don't know. We're gonna dig that part out tomorrow. But this has been the breakdown of where I think we are. I think you can see some places where I'm leaning a little bit. Again, I haven't made my final gut call on this either, but I am leaning a little bit towards, look, we got the home crowd. I think that our defense is going to respond this time like Gunner responded last time out. And I think we're going to keep seeing that I think what we have here is a young team, that the stars of this team, the guys who are going to be, everyday household names and big time draft picks, either at the end of the year or at the end of next year, these guys are going to start to emerge each game. Okay. So maybe this week is the Gunner Stockton, all of a sudden is back in at least fringe Heisman conversation, maybe better than fringe after the Tennessee game. I think after this week, we're going to have one or two guys on defense whose names are back up there with like, okay, this is a guy who's working towards being a high-level draft pick. Maybe it's Christian Miller. Maybe it's C.J. Allen. Maybe it's Chris Cole. But somebody's going to make a name for themselves on defense. And I think in general, the defense is going to step up. And I think the matchup just favors us, even though technically I think by ratings, if you're looking at the individual players, Alabama is a better offense. So I think our defense, I think Alabama can move the ball, but I think they're going to be one-dimensional. And I think our defense is going to force that. That's what our defense will do, Alabama offense versus our defense. I think our offense is not one-dimensional. And I think Bama defense is good, and they may slow us down. They may keep us, we may not get to 500 yards and 40 points this time, but I think they can do enough to win this game, whatever that is. And I think that's one of the things this team is finding its identity as, is they're going to find whatever it is that it takes to win. And I think this offense can do it. I don't think Alabama's also giving up on the run a little too much, and they've been susceptible to running quarterbacks. And so I think that's still a place where I'm not, again, willing to come out right now and say for sure 500 yards, 38 points from the offense. But I think the offense is going to win more than not. I think they're going to win time of possession. I think they're going to grind out yards. I think Gunner's going to be help running the ball. I think the running backs are also going to run the ball. I think we're going to have good running yardage, or I think we're going to have a good result from the run game. Tennessee was the same way. We had the average was not awesome, like 3.8 yards per carry or something like that. But we stuck with it, and we had enough plays thanks to their offense leaving the field so quickly. We had more plays than them. Again, we had 87 plays to their 70. Okay. So with 87 plays, we were able to stick with the run and grind out 200 yards rushing. And I think we can do that again this week. So I think our offense will run successfully and be successful. It'll accomplish what it wants to accomplish, which is eating clock, gaining yards, scoring. I think the Bama offense is capable of scoring and hitting big plays, but not consistently doing the same thing I just described. They're not going to be able to consistently run and eat clock. They're going to be much more one-dimensional. And I think we definitely have the edge on special teams, and I'm going to give Kirby the edge over Kalen DeBoer as far as the coaching and the intangibles. So that's our breakdown. Our true outcomes. True outcomes are Bama blows us out. Could happen. I mean, we could turn the ball over 4 times, throw a pick 6, fumble deep in our own territory. They could throw a couple, get 3 or 4 deep passes. Game could get out of control. It could happen. 20% chance maybe. We could do the same thing. Maybe we cause them to have turnovers. Maybe our offense just clicks at the highest level. Big passes, big runs. We put up a bunch of yards, and the defense is electric. Could happen. I'm saying 30% chance. I think we have a little better chance than they do. Lions' share of the money is going to sit on the close game, and I think the close game is the most likely scenario, and 50% chance of that, and the intangibles and stuff hopefully favor us in that. But we'll get to the exact prediction tomorrow. We're going to call it here for today. We got more stuff. We're going to take a look tomorrow. We're going to make the prediction. We're going to look at each of the 5 losses that Alabama has had under Kalen DeBoer. There's a very similar pattern to them that fits what we just talked about today. So you'll see that as we break that down tomorrow. And then we'll come with our final pick, which I guess will be a combination of all this data and thinking and just the ultimate gut check at the end. I think you can tell I'm leaning. I feel pretty good about this. And what I'll really feel good about too, let me tell everybody out there, if you're one of the people going to the game, be loud, be strong, be early, be often. This is one of those games that I think one of the intangibles is going to be the crowd, the light show, the pyrotechnics, the whole thing. Bama has had some kryptonite on the road, so let's just feed that. Let's put as much kryptonite out there as possible. So I'm fired up. I'm excited. It's another big game. It's super exciting to talk about. I'm sure you're fired up. Here we are. It's Friday. We only have one more night to sleep on it. Now, we do have all day tomorrow. We got to wait till 7:30, so it's a long day, but there's a lot of great football out there. I'll probably mention that too tomorrow a little bit, just remind you what the other football is that you can pay attention to. Check out SEC Nation is come to campus. Game day went to the Oregon-Penn State game, which makes sense. That's a 3 versus 6 matchup. So, but SEC Nation is on campus, so check that out too. It's always fun to get a lot of, and I hope a lot of fans will show up and give a lot of big hurrahs so that, they have the enthusiasm and talk about how we have the best crowds that show up, la-di-da-di-da. So, hope you're getting your plans set. You're going to be with other great Bulldogs enjoying what should be an exciting and compelling game no matter what happens. We know what we want to happen, and I think that there's good chances that the right things are going to happen this time. But let's do our part. Let's be loud. Let's be proud. Let's be good damn dogs. So go Dogs.